So today we're going to take a closer look at this sweetheart, the Luxman L550 AXII Mark II. This is a Class A integrated amplifier from Japan that's rated at outputting 20 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 40 watts per channel into 4 ohms. And if you don't think that's enough power for you, well, keep watching because you may be surprised. Now, it's impossible to start off a Luxman review without first commenting on the aesthetic and the overall build quality because, guys, in person, this thing is absolutely fantastic. It practically eschews what luxury hi-fi is all about. Everything looks good and feels solid to the touch. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over the features that you get with this integrated amplifier, starting with the front panel. So let's just go from left to right. On the bottom left, we have our power button. Turn that on and those beautiful VU meters will illuminate in the display case. Now, I noticed Luxman went with this LED light that has this kind of faint orange-yellow hue to it, and it just looks great. It almost reminds me of looking at a tube amplifier, especially at night. It's very relaxing to the eyes. On the very top left-hand corner, we have our input selector switch. Right now I have it on the balanced inputs, but as you can tell, you can switch it to what you want, and it just has this satisfying resistance to it and this nice sound. Now on the very bottom left, we have a monitor button. Now this is interesting. This harkens back to the days of vinyl and tape, and what this does is this allows you to monitor the levels of, say, tape as you're recording through this integrated amp. I'm not sure how many people are going to use its feature, but it's definitely there. Next to that, we have a built-in phono stage, so this allows you to switch between moving magnet and moving coil. And listen to this, guys. It just has this satisfying click to it. We have a record out, off and on. We have a speaker A/B selection switch, so the Luxman L550 can power 8 speakers at once, so long as they're rated at 8 ohms or higher. We have our tone controls. The bass is set to 100 hertz, whereas the treble is set to 10 kilohertz. Next to that, we have our left to right balance. We also have our line straight function, so if you want to bypass the tone control circuit, just hit this button. Then we have something called separate. So what this does is this allows the L550 to operate as just an amplifier, assuming you're using a preamp or something else with an effective volume control. On the very right, we have a headphone jack. I believe it's a 1/4 jack. And then on the very top, we have our volume control. Feels wonderful to the touch, as you can imagine. That's going to be the front of the unit. So now let's take a quick look at the back. Okay, so here's the back of the L550, and as you can tell, it's pretty straightforward because this isn't meant to be a modern tech piece with the ability to stream directly to the unit or to connect to your Wi-Fi or to have a built-in DAC with all this upscaling. Instead, this is meant to be an analog solution. So, going over the features from left to right, we have a terminal for ground in case you need to use it. We have our input for the phono stage. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 auxiliary inputs. We have a record out, record in, a pre-out, a main in. We have our balanced inputs, and this is cool. We can even adjust the phase of the balanced inputs. We have speaker terminal A, speaker terminal B, and an IEC inlet for our power cord. So that's it for the back. So now let's take a quick look at the remote control. So here's the remote control, and not only is it well made with adequate spacing between the buttons, but it also gives you access to 3 additional really cool features, such as a loudness button. This basically boosts the treble and the bass, and it serves people who have a little bit of difficulty hearing detail at low volumes. I found that the L550 doesn't really need that for my own self, but it's nice to have. Next to that, we have a subsonic filter, and we also have a mono button. Cool stuff. So now let's take a peek at the inside. So here's the inside of the L550, and man, I gotta say, guys, this is every bit as beautiful and as well made as I expected it to be. As you'll notice, each major circuit is completely isolated from one another, so let's go ahead and get things started by first taking a look at the large EI transformer. Now, I know a lot of audiophiles out there who believe that a high-quality component absolutely has to use a toroidal, and the bottom line is that is not true. In fact, EI transformers offer quite a few advantages over toroidals. But that's a topic best left for a different video. For now, all I can comment on is my observation that, yeah, this seems like a very well-made transformer. Now, some of you may be wondering, what's up with all this space in between the windings? Well, that's basically to serve as a pressure release valve for magnetic flux. You'll also notice this nice copper shielding. It's just nice stuff. Moving on, we have our filter caps. You get 40,000 microfarads in total. We have our heat sinks. Just everything about this integrated amp is well organized and so precise, right down to the little components that populate each board. Now there's a lot of tech inside the Luxman 550, and at the expense of sounding like an advertisement brochure, I'm just going to hone in on the big thing, which is it features an only distortion feedback scheme, which means it's only going to apply feedback once the circuit detects distortion. And this is pretty cool because I'm not sure how many of you know this, but Luxman invented the negative feedback circuit all the way back in the 1950s. So it's good to see them evolve. And up here we have our volume control, 88 steps, and according to Luxman, it is incredibly low noise and is built in a way that should last for a very long time. Now, of course, as you can imagine, none of this comes cheap. The price of the 550 AX Mark II is $5,495 US. So now the big question is, well, it's well made, but how does it actually sound? Let's talk about it. Alright, so now it's time to talk about performance. And before I begin, I need to lay down a couple important disclaimers first, starting with number one, the fact that I have no experience with the previous generation of the 550, meaning that I'm just not in a position to comment on how the Mark II compares to the Mark I. All I can do is talk about how the Mark II performs in the general all-around sense. And then moving on, look, I'm not really a headphone guy, so I'm not going to comment on how it performs with headphones, nor do I really listen to vinyl very often. Look, I love analog, but I'm not in a position to comment on how the phonostage performs. All I can do is talk about the performance of this unit in the general sense. So having said that, I think the best place to begin with this evaluation is to first set the right expectation for those of you who may seriously be considering this unit for yourself. So here's the deal. When you look at the 550 Mark II, what most of you will likely see is this large, beautiful Class A integrated amplifier. And as an audiophile, that triggers certain expectations. Most people would associate this look and that kind of circuit with a large, warm sound, something with a super smooth top end. And the reality is, that's not what you get out of the Mark II. Instead, what you're getting is more that classic Japanese high-end sound, which is more about honesty and transparency, about having really good balance between the treble, the mid-range, the bass, something that does a great job of revealing what your recording actually sounds like, what your gear actually sounds like. Only with the Luxman, there's a little bit of tuning here and there. You can tell that a human came in and made some decisions that I want the sound to be this way in this particular section, but it's all very subtle. And I gotta say, it's very well done because it rides that balance between not being overdone or underdone, not homogenizing, almost to the point where you can barely notice it. So here's the deal. When you listen to the 550, a few things are going to immediately jump out at you. Number one is the amount of detail that this unit can offer up. It is crazy. It is just absolutely crazy. And best of all, it does it in a very natural, unforced way. Next thing you're going to notice is that very spacious soundstage. You combine the two together, I mean, I know I said that about the Model 30 recently, but this takes it to a whole new level when compared and contrasted to the Marantz Model 30. It's almost like this wall of sound, only that everything is in its precise location. Obviously, as an audiophile, that is just awesome to experience. And then a lot of you will notice how strong this integrated amplifier is, not only in terms of power delivery, especially given its rating, but the dynamic output. Oh my goodness, guys. If you have even somewhat dynamic speakers, let alone efficient speakers, I think you will be surprised by how much weight and authority this amplifier gives to the music. Forget about the specs for a moment. I mean, it is just straight up impressive in that regard. And next, we need to talk about power. So 20 watts per channel into 8 ohms is not a lot, nor is 40 watts per channel into 4 ohms. Here's the deal. If you were to measure this integrated amplifier, you will find that it is significantly more powerful than what the specifications would suggest. Now, I'm going to leave that alone right there. That's a topic for another video. But this thing is capable of driving not only difficult speakers very well, but it can take things to reasonable volumes. Now, I do need to make it clear that it is best suited for intimate listening spaces. If you want that true, full range, big dynamic listening experience, then yeah, it does sound best in moderate to small rooms, especially while driving relatively efficient speakers. But overall, with the 550, you're getting a powerful yet transparent and balanced sound with an emphasis on strong dynamic output, big imaging, and a lot of detail. So now let's go into more detail, starting with the treble. So the treble, look, there's not really a whole lot to say here because when you're spending this kind of money, it has to be good, and it is good. But I need to emphasize that the treble presentation is very close to being an input-output situation. In other words, it's not bright, it's not rolled off, it's just more matter of fact. In fact, one could argue that when you press the line direct button and you bypass the tone controls, there may even be just a little bit, like a slight emphasis and sparkle to the top end. Which means if you have forward-sounding speakers, that's what you're going to hear. If you're listening to a forward-sounding recording, that's what you're going to hear. The Luxman isn't going to try and artificially smoothen that for you whatsoever. And yet, it sounds natural, very natural. And then we have the mid-range. A lot of people would think that, oh, the mid-range has got to be really warm, right? Well, no, not really. It has a great sense of scale. Really big sounding mid-range. But it doesn't have warmth to the sound, nor is it thin, nor is it dry. It's just right there in the middle. Not too much of this, not too much of that. And I gotta say, it's really balanced. This is something that I think experienced ears would definitely appreciate. I think if you're new to this and you listen to a Luxman for the first time and you expect to be amazed due to these artificial colorations, which can sound amazing at first, you may be disappointed with the 550. But if you are an experienced musician or audiophile, I think you'll appreciate the balance that they've struck here without being too much of one thing or too little of the other. Okay, so I just had to make an awkward cut because as I was filming, FedEx was banging on my door and I thought it wasn't going to be that audible, but then when I looked at the footage, yeah, it's definitely very, very audible. So here's the bottom line. The performance of the 550 Mark II does have this honest, tell it like it is sound, but there's still enough coloration, enough expression to make for an engaging listening experience, and it's something that I think many people would enjoy. And on that topic, let's pivot around and talk about the kind of speakers that really work well with something like a 550. Okay, so here's the deal. When you're spending this kind of money on an integrated amplifier, you expect it to sound good with pretty much everything. And while that is mostly true, there are some things that you need to bear in mind. The first is that the 550 AXII tends to sound best in more intimate listening spaces. Small to medium-sized rooms, or if you have a larger room, then you want to be sure to pair it up to something that's fairly power sensitive, because even though this integrated amplifier has more power than the specs would lead you to believe, it's still a fairly modest integrated amplifier in terms of power output. So you need to bear that in mind. Next, because the treble presentation is so matter of fact, and because the mid-range is also fairly matter of fact, I would hesitate to pair it up to speakers that are bright and thin in nature. Again, this is just something you need to experiment with, but I think those speakers may not make for the best match, but everything else should be fine. I mean, when I paired it up to my Dynaudio Evoke 10s, I've never heard them sound larger and more authoritative. It's a great experience. Same thing with the Harbeth P3 ESRs. Great match for those. And the big surprise for me was the Klipsch Cornwall 4. That pairing was actually so good, I may make a separate video about it. But the long story short is, it's not bright in any way, shape, or form. You have this big sense of scale, incredible clarity and imaging, strong bass output. It sounds like music. It's so much fun, yet at the same time, it's very much audiophile. And it's this beautiful balance that allows you to appreciate the system while at the same time just appreciating the music and the musicianship and the ability to just craft all of it together. It's an awesome listening experience. Definitely something I recommend for Klipsch Cornwall 4 owners. So anyways, guys, that's about it. So now let's go over some caveats. I'm going to have to really struggle to come up with something here. Actually, you know what? There are some caveats worth mentioning. So the first is that I think there's going to be a number of people out there who will look at the price tag, then they'll look at the power output rating, and they're going to throw a fit. Because in their mind, hey, if I'm spending that kind of money on an integrated amplifier, then it better power just about any speaker that I own to any volume I want. And while that's a legitimate complaint, it only highlights the fact that this integrated amplifier is not for that kind of a listener. Instead, it's more for somebody who wants quality over quantity. And then next, there's also going to be another group of people who say, hey, I'm spending this kind of money and I don't even get modern features like a built-in DAC and streaming and all that other stuff. Well, no, you don't. And again, that's not who this integrated amplifier was designed to appease. And then there's going to be people out there who don't like the fact that some of the features are only available via the remote control and wish that there were actual physical buttons that represented loudness or the subsonic filter or mono operation. And then, of course, lastly, there's the sound. Not everybody's going to fall in love with the sound either, especially those who are coming into this expecting this warm, lush, super smooth, borderline rolled off presentation. No, this is actually airy. It's very detailed, a huge soundstage, but as otherwise will give you more of a tell it like it is presentation. Some people are going to love that, especially experienced listeners, but I think other people may not love it so much. But for me personally, I think this is a great integrated amplifier, and that leads me to my final thoughts. Okay, so at this point, assuming I've done my job well enough, you should know whether or not the 550 Mark II is something that would be a good fit for you and for your system. So because of that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end this evaluation on a completely subjective note. So I'm just going to give you my own personal thoughts and opinions on the 550 Mark II. So overall, this is the kind of integrated amplifier that reminds me of why I'm into hi-fi to begin with, because this is something that not only has great performance, which again, it has to for the money, but it's also the kind of product that engages multiple senses. It looks good. It's pleasant to just look at in a room, even when it's not playing music. It's nice to actually physically adjust the knobs and to move the volume. And then, of course, there's the listening experience, which is also awesome. And I really admire how they've gone in this direction of not chasing that classic and cliche warm sound, and instead they've gone for something that's more honest and balanced and transparent. Yet at the same time, it still has some of those attributes that make for a fun listening experience. That wall of sound, all that detail, that little bit of sparkle in the top end when you go line direct, that little bit extra in the bass, all of that when you add it together makes for an awesome listening experience. Yet it doesn't homogenize things. You still get to experience the recording in your equipment for what it really is. And that is a fine balancing act that's not easy to accomplish, even at this price. Which is why the 550 is going to be staying at the Zero Fidelity stables from this point onwards, because not only is it a lot of fun to listen to, but I think the voicing makes it a very important reference point for something in this class. So guys, I don't know how else to end this review, so that is going to be my final take on the 550 Mark II, an awesome integrated amplifier. And I don't really have a comparison for you at the end like I normally do. And that's because I just so happen to have a Yamaha, an AccuPhase, and this Luxman on hand. So that will be for a separate video, probably a month or so away from now. So hopefully you took something valuable away from this video. As always, thanks for watching. And until next time, peace.